My parents kicked me out in 10th grade the same night I told them I was pregnant. No tears. No hesitation. Just the door slamming behind me like they couldn't wait to erase me from their perfect little world. I survived the cold, the hunger, the years of silence. I built a life they never thought I'd have. And then, 22 years later, they came back. Standing on my porch like ghosts demanding justice. Let us see the child, they said, as if they still had the right to ask for anything. But when I opened the door and looked them straight in the eyes, I told them the only truth they deserved. What child? What are you? And in that moment, everything they thought they knew shattered. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reaches. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If you want more stories like mine, stories about survival justice and taking your life back, hit that subscribe button. My name is Nova Hale, and this is what really happened. The morning they came back, everything felt annoyingly perfect. Rain slid down the glass walls of my house in Forest Park, in slow silver lines, the kind of Portland drizzle that makes the trees look greener and the city feel far away. I padded barefoot across the hardwood, poured myself a coffee, and opened my laptop on the kitchen island. My inbox was full of updates about Orion's latest build bug reports, investor questions, a link to an article calling his software the future of hospitality. I skimmed it with the kind of detached pride you earn, not the kind you're born into. I took a sip, turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, and just stood there for a second watching the rain blur the outline of the forest. There was a time when a gray morning meant figuring out which bench I could sleep on without freezing. Now it meant arguing with venture capitalists about valuation. I told myself, like I had 1,000 times before, that the past was a corpse I'd already buried. All the nights on cold concrete, the way my father's voice sounded when he told me I wasn't his daughter anymore, that was another girl's story. Or at least, that's what I like to pretend. That illusion lasted right up until someone started pounding on my front door. The sound didn't match the house. This place was built for quiet, soft, close cabinets, whispering HVAC, double-paned glass. The knocking was hard, frantic, like whoever was on the other side thought the world would end if I didn't answer in 5 seconds. My first thought was something practical. Maybe a neighbor's pipe burst. Maybe Amazon left a package at the wrong place. And the driver was freaking out. The pounding came again, 3 heavy blows that rattled the frame. My stomach did a strange little flip I couldn't explain. I set my mug down, walked through the living room past the clean lines and calm colors I'd chosen on purpose, and stopped at the door. Old habits have a way of surviving even the nicest zip code. I checked the security monitor first, then leaned into the peephole. For a second, I thought my brain was misfiring, dragging up old images and laying them over the present. Gray sky, wet porch, 2 figures huddled under the awning. Silas and Marjorie Hale, my parents. Older, obviously. My father's hair had gone almost entirely white, and the lines around my mother's mouth had carved in deeper, but the expressions were the same, tight, critical, like the whole world was always one step away from embarrassing them. She still wore too much drugstore perfume. I swear I could smell the ghost of it through 2 inches of wood and 22 years. My hand froze on the deadbolt. Every memory I'd worked so hard to silence crashed against each other in my chest. The slap of the front door closing behind me, the snap of my suitcase handle breaking on the sidewalk, the sound my mother's heels made when she walked away instead of after me. Why now? Why, after all this time? I could have let it ring out, could have walked away, called the cops, told security to handle it. Instead, I turned the lock and opened the door. The rain blew in around them, but they didn't seem to feel it. Silas straightened like we were in his foyer, not mine, his voice still carrying that clipped authority I used to mistake for strength. "We came to see our grandchild," he said. "No hello. No, how have you been?" Just that. It's been 22 years, Nova. It's time. Marjorie stepped forward, clutching her coat at the collar, eyes already shining with rehearsed tears. You can't keep being this selfish, she said, her tone soft but edged. No matter what happened back then, the child is still our blood. Their coats were soaked at the shoulders, but everything else about them was as curated as ever. Matching scarves, polished shoes, the same posture they used to practice in the mirror before church. They looked like a campaign photo for aging respectable couple if you ignored the rot underneath. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to slam the door and throw the deadbolt so hard the frame cracked. Instead, I just let the silence stretch between us until it turned heavy. I watched their faces the way impatience flickered behind concern. When I finally spoke, my voice surprised me, low, steady, nothing like the shaking 16-year-old they'd thrown out. What child? I asked. I held my father's gaze, then my mother's. And what exactly do you two think you are to walk up here and demand anything? Marjorie's face bled of color so fast it almost fascinated me. Silas opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again as if no one had ever told him no in a way that stuck. Nova, he said like he was scolding me for tracking mud inside. We all made mistakes. But the baby was innocent. Marjorie jumped in tears, finally spilling. The night you walked into the living room with that test in your hand. Do you remember? You were shaking. We should have handled it differently. We were scared. But the child, our grandchild, shouldn't pay for that. The way she said walked into the living room with that test hit me like a ghost hand on my shoulder. I saw it clear as day, the fluorescent light, the cheap plastic stick, my own fingers white-knuckled around it. I also saw things they were pretending not to remember, the shouting, the ultimatum, the 10 minutes they gave me to stop being their daughter. My jaw clenched. You didn't just kick me out, I said quietly. You did more than that. But I'm sure that part slipped your minds. For a second my thoughts slid to a different piece of paper, the one they'd shoved in front of me at the dining room table, the one I signed with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. Legal language I didn't understand. Words like relinquish and waiver and no further obligation. I could still see my signature at the bottom, the ink smearing where my tear had fallen. I felt the weight of it now like a folded knife in my pocket, but they didn't know that. Not yet. We're still your parents, Silas insisted, taking a half step inside like he owned the threshold. That doesn't change. We have a right to know our own grandchild. The word parent scraped along my nerves. I stepped into his space just enough that he had to choose between holding his ground or backing up. Family, I said. Is that what we're calling it? From what moment exactly? From the night you locked the door in my face and turned the deadbolt with me, still on the porch at 16. My pulse thudded in my ears, and for a split second the rain vanished, and I was back there. The driveway slick with ice, the yellow porch light turning my breath into smoke. The sound of the lock twisting while I begged them through the wood. My fingers curled against the cool metal of my own doorknob, now solid and real. I took a breath. You want to talk about that? I asked. You want to talk about what really happened before you walked up here demanding a child you don't know? They stared at me, and behind their shock I saw something else. Fear that this conversation was not going the way they'd planned. I let them sit in it for a beat before I added, Fine. Let's start where it all actually began. With the night I lost everything you said I was. The words tasted like metal on my tongue. 22 years ago, I was 16, a sophomore in a nowhere town in Wyoming. Back then, our kitchen looked like the kind of place people submitted to magazines. White cabinets, a bowl of oranges, no one ever ate, sunlight angling in, just right through the window over the sink. Cereal boxes lined up like soldiers on the counter, toast, waiting in the rack, a pitcher of orange juice sweating onto a coaster. To anyone walking in, we were a perfectly normal family getting ready for a perfectly normal day. My father sat at the head of the table reading the local paper like it contained state secrets instead of bake sale announcements. My mother moved around him, setting plates, reminding me about the church fundraiser that weekend and what dress I'd be wearing for the photo on stage. I sat there in my pressed shirt and stiff jeans, making sure my hair was smooth. My backpack was zipped, my shoes had no scuffs. There could be no flaws in the Hale household. Not on the surfaces, and definitely not in the daughter. The illusion cracked for me in moments, not in explosions. That morning, it happened when my father's phone buzzed on the table. His jaw was tight, his answers to my mother short. But when he saw the caller ID, his whole demeanor shifted. He cleared his throat, smoothed the front of his shirt, and picked up with a voice that sounded like it belonged to a different man. Warm, generous, practiced. "Pastor, good morning," he said, already half smiling. "Yes, of course, we'd be honored to stand with the other sponsor families this Sunday. The Hale family is always ready to serve." I watched him talk about us like we were a brand he was pitching. Model home, model marriage, model daughter. He even laughed on cue. In that moment, something in my chest twisted. I realized our life wasn't just being lived, it was being marketed. We weren't a family, we were a campaign. At school, I tried to shrink into the middle of everything. Not the cheerleaders, not the band kids, just background. The hallways smelled like cheap perfume and floor cleaner lockers slamming in a rhythm I knew by heart. I kept my head down, grades up, and my mouth shut. That was the deal. As long as I didn't attract the wrong kind of attention, my parents didn't have to work overtime to spin anything. Then, Talon Crest noticed me. He was the kind of boy people whispered about in the halls. Good hair, easy smile parents who owned half the town's construction projects. He didn't walk so much as glide, always surrounded by noise and people. The first time he talked to me, it was at my locker. I was fighting with the combination fingers, cold and clumsy, when he leaned against the metal door like he'd been sent there by central casting. "You know that thing isn't a safe, right?" he said. "You don't have to crack it like a bank vault." I rolled my eyes because even at 16 I had limits. "It sticks," I muttered, yanking the handle. "Pretty sure that's not a crime." "Here," he said, gently moving my hand aside like he'd known me for years. He spun the dial once, bumped the door with his hip, and it popped open. "You just have to know where to knock." I should have been annoyed. Instead, I laughed. He said my name like it was something he'd been curious about for a while. Not the Hale girl, not Silas's daughter. Just Nova. From there, it was study sessions that turned into long conversations, movie nights that turned into parked car confessions, walks out to the edge of town where the asphalt broke into dirt and the stars seemed close enough to touch. He told me he hated the way his parents used his future as cocktail party talking points. I told him I hated the way mine used my existence as proof of their morality. "I'll never let them hurt you," he told me once, lying on the hood of his truck while we watched our breath fog up into the cold night. "You know that, right?" No one had ever promised to stand between me and anything. I wanted so badly to believe him that I folded myself around those words and waited for them to be true. At home, the mask slipped off my parents' faces when they thought I wasn't listening. One night, I padded down the hall for water and stopped when I heard my name through the crack of the living room door. "We can't let anything happen with that girl," my father was saying, his voice low and tight. "The pastor wants us on stage this quarter. The board is watching." My mother sighed like I was a spreadsheet she was tired of updating. "If Nova messes this up, we handle it. She's part of the image, Silas. If the image breaks, we fix it. Delete what needs to be deleted." I stood there barefoot on the cool tile, feeling less like a daughter and more like a logo they could redesign if it stopped performing. A few weeks later, I came home late from being with Talon. Nothing dramatic. 15 minutes past curfew, the kind of thing any normal family would handle with a stern talk and maybe grounded for a weekend. I opened the door, bracing for yelling. Instead, my mother sat at the dining table with a pen and a small notebook. She glanced at the clock, then at me, then silently wrote something down. No raised voice. No lecture. "You're home," she said flatly. "Go to bed. You have school." I went upstairs with my heart pounding, waiting for the explosion that never came. I told myself she was finally easing up, that maybe I'd imagined that conversation in the living room. I didn't know she was keeping a ledger. Every mistake logged, every tiny crack in the facade recorded for later use. At church, the mask tightened again. One Sunday morning, while I stood in the lobby pretending to be interested in the bulletin board, one of the women from the choir came up to me, her hand light on my arm. "Honey, are you okay?" she whispered. "You look a little pale." It was the first time anyone had asked me directly if I was all right. Before I could answer, my father materialized at my side, a hand firm on my shoulder as he laughed. "She's fine," he said. "Our Nova is perfect. Nothing unfortunate ever happens in our house." The woman gave me an apologetic look over his shoulder. My throat felt tight. He hadn't just answered for me. He'd erased any possibility that I might need help. In the church bathroom after service, I locked myself in a stall and stared at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh yellow tint over my face. I smoothed my hair, straightened my blouse, and watched a girl I barely recognized mimic the motions. I placed a hand flat against my stomach, which was still as flat as any 16-year-old's, and whispered, "Who am I actually living for?" I didn't know then how fast the answer would come. I didn't know that in a matter of weeks, I'd be staring down at 2 pink lines on a cheap plastic stick, realizing that my body had made a promise my family would rather die than keep. A few weeks after that Sunday in the church bathroom, my body gave me the answer I didn't want. I sat on my bed with a calendar open on my phone, counting days, then counting them again, just to be sure I hadn't miscalculated. I was more than 2 weeks late. I told myself it was stress, that AP Bio and choir and my parents' endless events had just thrown me off. But there was this quiet, cold certainty settling in my gut that wouldn't move. After school one day, instead of getting on my bus, I stayed on as it rattled out past our neighborhood, past the grocery store where everyone knew my parents, to a strip mall in the next town over. I kept my hood up, head down, walked into a drugstore, and went straight to the aisle I'd never let myself look at before. The box practically burned my hands as I carried it to the register. The teenage cashier didn't even glance at me, but I felt exposed anyway, like my parents could somehow see through camera feeds that I was buying something that could shatter their carefully curated world. I shoved the test deep into my backpack and rode home in silence, the weight of it heavier than my textbooks. In our bathroom that night, I locked the door and turned on the fan like it could drown out the pounding of my heart. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the plastic stick into the toilet. I read the instructions twice, then did what it said, and set it on the edge of the sink. 5 minutes. I watched the second hand on my watch crawl around the face, feeling like I was standing on a railroad track watching a train come. When the faint second line started to appear, my ears rang. The bathroom tiles, the towel rack, my own face in the mirror all went slightly out of focus, and for a second I thought I might pass out. 2 lines. Pregnant. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, knees pulled up, the test clutched in my fist. I had no idea what to do except one thing: call Talon. If anyone was going to stand next to me in this, it had to be the boy who promised he wouldn't let anyone hurt me. I went back to my room, shut the door, and dialed his number with fingers that didn't feel like mine. When he answered, his voice was casual, like it was any other afternoon. "Hey, Nova. What's up?" I couldn't ease into it. The words came out broken. "I took a test," I said. "I'm late. And I took a test. I'm pregnant." For a heartbeat, there was nothing on the line, not even his breathing. "Talon," I whispered. "Say something." When he finally spoke, his tone had changed, tighter around the edges. "Okay," he said slowly. "Okay. We'll figure it out. We'll talk. I promise we'll work this out." I clung to that promise like it was a life raft. After we hung up, I curled around my pillow and let myself believe that whatever storm was coming, I wouldn't face it alone. The next day at school, he didn't show up. I kept glancing at the door to our history class, waiting for him to slide in late with that half grin he used when he knew he could get away with it. His seat stayed empty. One day turned into 2, then 3. My texts got left undelivered. My calls went to voicemail. When I did get through, once it rang and then cut off mid-tone like someone had pressed reject. By the end of the week, there was a hollow pit where my hope had been. On Friday, I skipped last period and walked to his house. The Crest property sat at the top of a hill hidden behind a manicured hedge and a black iron gate. A car I didn't recognize, sleek and expensive, was parked in the driveway. I hesitated at the intercom, then pressed the button and waited. No answer. I saw a curtain move in an upstairs window and caught the outline of a woman's profile, his mother, I thought. But the curtain snapped shut again. The gate never opened. I stood there long enough for the cold to seep into my shoes, then turned around and walked back down the hill, feeling smaller with each step. The following Monday, I found a plain envelope shoved through the vent of my locker. No name on the front, no cute doodles like Talon used to leave, just my last name typed neatly in the corner. Inside was a printed letter on thick paper with a law firm's logo I'd never seen before. It didn't take long to understand. The language was formal, full of words like alleged defamatory, and demand you cease and desist from asserting any claim of paternity involving our client's son. There was a line that said the Crest family would pursue legal action if I continued to endanger their good name. My hands went numb as I read. The boy who said he'd never let anyone hurt me hadn't just disappeared. He'd sent an army of adults to make sure I stayed quiet. By the time I got home that night, something inside me had snapped and hardened at the same time. I stood in front of my mirror looking at the dark circles under my eyes, the raw redness around my nose from crying. My stomach was still flat, but I knew what was growing there. I knew I couldn't keep this from my parents forever. For all their control, for all their obsession with image, they were still the adults in the house. They had to care that their 16-year-old daughter was carrying a baby. That's what I told myself as I walked downstairs that evening, the letter from the lawyer hidden under my mattress like a crime. My father was in his armchair, TV glowing blue on his face as the news anchor droned on about some local zoning meeting. My mother was at the dining table folding laundry into precise stacks. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice sounding thin in my own ears. They both looked up. I didn't bother easing into it. I stood there in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room and said, "I'm pregnant." The world didn't actually stop, but it felt like it. My father's hand froze on the remote. Then he stood so fast the chair scraped against the floor. He jabbed the power button, plunging the room into an unfamiliar silence. His eyes raked over me not with concern, but with a kind of cold assessment, like he was looking at a broken appliance. "With who?" my mother asked, her voice flat, her face unreadable. "Who did this?" "Talon," I whispered. "Talon Crest." The name hung between us like smoke. My father's fist came down on the table so hard a neatly folded towel slid to the floor. "Do you have any idea what you've just done to my reputation?" he snapped. "To this family. To everything we've built." I flinched more from the words than the sound. "I'm scared," I said. "I don't know what to do. I thought you thought we'd—" What my mother cut in, not raising her voice, which somehow made it worse. "Hold your hand. Tell the church that our precious daughter got herself knocked up by the Crest boy's smile while people whisper." She picked up the fallen towel, refolded it, set it back in the stack. Like that act mattered more than the fact that her child was shaking in front of her. "You need to leave," she said quietly. I stared at her, convinced I'd heard wrong. "What?" My father left the room without a word and came back with a thin folder and a pen. He dropped them on the table in front of me and opened to the last page where my name was already typed above a blank line. "This is a statement," he said. that you are choosing to move out on your own, that you take full responsibility for your situation, and that you will not seek support from us. It protects us from any fallout. I'm 16, I said. I don't even have a job. I can't just sign. You already have, my mother said, eyes like glass. When you decided to behave like this is just the paperwork catching up. My father shoved the pen into my hand. You want to bring shame into this house, that's your choice. But you won't drag us down with you. My vision blurred. The words on the page swam dense and formal, but I could make out enough to know what it meant. I was waiving claims, relinquishing rights, agreeing they owed me nothing. My hands were shaking so hard the pen scratched. I thought about saying no, about ripping the paper up and daring them to call the police or the pastor or whoever else they were so terrified of disappointing. But my heart was pounding my mouth dry, and the baby inside me felt like a secret I had to shield from the storm in front of me at any cost. So I signed. My name dragged across the bottom of the page, letters uneven, a smear of ink where a tear fell. My father flipped the folder shut like that was that. You have 10 minutes, he said. Pack whatever you can carry. After that, this is no longer your home. I went upstairs on legs that didn't seem to want to hold me. In my room, the posters on the wall and the fairy lights I'd strung over my bed looked like they belonged to someone else. I pulled clothes from drawers without seeing them, shoved them into my old duffel bag. A few t-shirts, a pair of jeans, underwear, my toothbrush. I took the small silver necklace my grandmother had given me before she died and slipped it into my pocket. When I came back down, my mother was at the fireplace taking the family portrait off the mantel. In the photo, we were all smiling in coordinated outfits, me in the middle, teeth bared in the way girls are taught to smile when they're being watched. She turned the frame over and laid it face down on the hearth. Watching that felt worse than anything she'd said. It was like seeing myself erased in real time. At the door, my father held it open without looking at me. From this moment on, he said, you are no longer my daughter. I stepped out onto the porch. The air hit me like a slap. Behind me, the door slammed shut, and the deadbolt turned with a small, decisive click. The street was nearly empty, the kind of quiet you only notice when you've just been told you don't belong anywhere. Streetlights cast weak yellow circles on the wet pavement. I clutched the strap of my duffel, pulled my jacket tighter around me, and started walking. The cold bit straight through my jeans. Every step made my legs ache, but I didn't stop. At the end of the block, I paused under a flickering street lamp, laid a hand over my stomach, and whispered, "It's just us now. Just you and me." I headed toward the highway, toward the bus stop that could at least take me somewhere that wasn't here. I had no plan beyond that, just motion. The further I got from the house, the more the sobs built in my chest, coming out in little gasps that turned to fog in the freezing air. By the time I reached the bus stop on the edge of town, the sky had darkened, and the wind had picked up, slicing through the gaps in my jacket. The schedule taped to the pole told me the next bus wasn't coming for almost an hour. I wrapped my arms around myself and shifted from foot to foot, trying to keep the feeling in my toes. A dull cramp tugged low in my belly, small, but enough to make fear ripple through me. I was 16, pregnant, and standing on the side of a road in Wyoming in the dead of night with nowhere to go. That's where I was when I saw the headlights. They appeared over the rise in the road, growing brighter, slowing in a way that made it clear this wasn't just some car passing by. The beam washed over me, stretching my shadow long on the asphalt. Brakes squealed softly as the car, a black sedan too nice for this stretch of highway, rolled to a stop in front of the bus sign. The passenger window hummed down, letting in a blast of warm air and the soft smell of leather and something floral. A woman sat behind the wheel, silver hair pulled back, a wool coat buttoned up to her throat, eyes as sharp as they were kind. She took one long look at me, at the duffel, the red nose, the way I was trying not to shiver, and said in a voice that somehow cut through the noise in my head, "Are you planning to let this storm finish you off out here? Or are you getting in the car?" For a second, all I could do was stare at her. Every cautionary tale I'd ever been told about strangers and cars ran screaming through my mind. But my fingers were numb, my teeth chattering, and the ache in my lower belly was getting harder to ignore. I glanced down the empty road, hoping maybe a bus would magically appear early. Nothing but blowing snow and darkness. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice rough. "Bus is coming." She flicked her eyes toward the schedule on the pole, then back to me. "Not for another 50 minutes, she said. "You won't be fine by then." There was no panic in her voice, no exaggerated sympathy. Just an observation, as if she were noting the weather. "I'm not going to hurt you. You can sit in the back if it makes you feel better. Door stays unlocked. You can get out any time." It was the way she said it that got to me. Calm, measured, like she'd had to convince skittish creatures to trust her before. My legs carried me forward before my brain had fully caught up. I opened the back door and slid in, keeping my duffel on my lap like a shield. The heat blasted against my frozen cheeks. I hadn't realized how cold I was until something inside me started to thaw. She put the car back in drive, pulled away from the shoulder, and merged back onto the road, like this was the most natural thing in the world. For several miles, she didn't say anything. No questions, no small talk. The silence felt strangely respectful, not awkward. I stared at the dashboard, at the little glowing clock, at the way her hands rested steady on the wheel. "Have you eaten?" she asked. Finally, eyes still on the road. Of everything I expected her to ask, "Where are your parents? What are you doing out here? Do you know how dangerous this is?" That wasn't it? Something in my chest cracked. "Not really," I admitted, my voice catching. "Since when this morning?" It came out a whisper. My throat tightened, tears spilling over before I could swallow them back. I turned my face toward the window, ashamed of crying in front of a stranger, but once the dam broke, I couldn't stop. Sobs shook through me, ugly and loud and years in the making. She didn't reach back to pat my knee or tell me to calm down. She just drove, letting me fall apart in the dark warmth of her car. When I finally gulped in enough air to steady myself, she spoke again. "Name's Eveline," she said. "Eveline Shore. We're about 20 minutes from my place in Utah if the pass isn't too bad. There's food, a doctor I trust, and a fireplace that doesn't quit. You can stay the night, warm up, eat, and decide what you want to do next in the morning. Or I can drop you at the next bus station and pretend I never saw you. Your call." Utah. I hadn't even realized we'd crossed the state line. I pressed a hand to my stomach, feeling that same protective instinct flare. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "You don't know me." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the faintest hint of a smile tug at her mouth. "I know enough," she said. "I know what it looks like when a girl's been thrown away to keep someone else's reputation clean." The words landed with unsettling precision. I opened my mouth to ask how she could possibly know that about me, but my body answered before my brain could. "I don't have anywhere else," I whispered. "Then let's get you somewhere," she replied, as if that settled it. Her house sat on a slope above a small Utah town, lights glowing warm against the dark. From the outside, it looked like something out of a magazine-wide porch, big windows, a front door that probably cost more than my parents ever spent on my birthdays combined. Inside, it felt even stranger. Not because it was fancy, though it was, but because it was lived in. Shelves overflowing with books that had actually been read, paintings that weren't just generic landscapes from a chain store, a pair of worn slippers kicked off by the fireplace. She hung up her coat, handed me a blanket straight from a warming rack, and pointed at the couch. "Sit," she said, not unkindly. "I'll make soup." Before I could protest, she was in the kitchen, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd cooked for more than herself. My stomach growled loud enough to be embarrassing. When she came back with a bowl, the smell of chicken and herbs nearly undid me all over again. "Eat first," she said, handing me a spoon. "We can talk after the doctor leaves." "Doctor?" I blinked. I didn't say, "You didn't have to." Her eyes flicked briefly to my midsection. "I called him from the car. He owes me more than a house call." An hour later, I was sitting on a bed in a guest room that was nicer than any hotel room I'd ever seen, while a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a worn leather bag did an exam and asked gentle, practical questions. He never once asked where my parents were. He talked to me like I was the only person whose opinion mattered about my body. When he left, he told Evelyn quietly in the hallway that for now things looked stable, but stress and exposure could change that fast. She closed the door behind him and came to sit in the chair opposite the bed, hands folded loosely in her lap. "You can stay here," she said. "As long as you need. No one will bother you. But if you stay, I'm not just giving you a room and a few hot meals. I'm going to teach you how not to end up on the side of a road again because someone else decided you were disposable." I searched her face, trying to find the angle. Why, I asked. Why help me? Why care? She leaned back, eyes on mine, and for the first time I saw past the composed surface. There was a hardness there that matched my own, the kind that only comes from having been on the losing side of someone else's story. "I know who your parents are, Nova," she said quietly. "I know exactly what people like Silas and Marjorie Hale do when something threatens their image. I watched them smile on that church stage years ago, and I knew one day if the right kind of mistake happened, they'd rather cut their child out like a tumor than admit they were human." My breath caught. "How do you know them?" That she said, a hint of steel in her voice, is a longer conversation. Another night. The short version is this: I've seen what people like them can do. And a long time ago, when I was not much older than you, someone should have pulled over and told me to get in the car. No one did. I can't change that. But I can do this. I looked down at my hands, still trembling slightly, resting protectively on my stomach. The idea of going back out into the cold, of trying to navigate bus stations and cheap motels and whatever, waited for a pregnant 16-year-old alone, made my skin crawl. Staying here meant trusting a stranger who knew too much, who clearly had her own reasons for taking me in. But when I thought about the alternative, the choice didn't feel like a choice at all. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "If I stay?" "I want you to learn," she said simply. "How money works, how contracts work, how to read a room and a balance sheet, how to protect yourself so thoroughly that one day when the people who threw you away come crawling back, you won't need anything from them. Not a check, not an apology, not even their approval." Her words sent a strange current through me, some mix of fear and possibility I'd never felt before. "You really think they'd come back?" I asked. "People like that always do," she said. "When they smell success?" I sat there for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything pressing in from every side: the baby, the paper I'd signed, the echo of my father's last sentence to me. Then I nodded. "Okay," I said. "I'll stay." Her shoulders relaxed in a way I only noticed because I'd been watching her so closely. She stood smoothing her coat. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow we start with breakfast and the basics. One step at a time." When she left the room, closing the door softly behind her, I lay back on the crisp sheets, one hand over my abdomen. Somewhere in the house, I heard the faint crackle of a fire and the murmur of voices from a TV turned low. It was more warmth than I'd had in a long time, and it scared me how much I wanted to sink into it. That night, in a stranger's house in Utah, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender, I had no idea I'd just walked through a door that would change everything about who I was allowed to be. I didn't know yet that the price of being saved would be learning how to face every ugly piece of my past without flinching. I only knew that for the first time since those 2 pink lines appeared, I didn't feel completely alone. Evelyn didn't send me back to school right away. First, she moved me into one of the smaller rooms at her downtown Shoreline hotel and gave me something I hadn't had in a long time: structure. Mornings were for breakfast and questions. Not the soft emotional kind. Practical things. "Do you know what a balance sheet is? Do you know what happens if you sign a contract you don't understand? Do you know who actually owns the roof over your head? Most of my answers were no. She didn't flinch. Good, she said. Better to learn now than when it's on fire. Afternoons I shadowed staff. The shoreline wasn't some roadside motel. It was the kind of place business travelers bragged about expensing. Marble floors, tall windows, guests in tailored suits. The employees were kind but wary of me at first, the stray girl their boss had suddenly taken in. I worked the front desk in the evenings, checking people in, learning the system, watching faces. That was the first real skill she drilled into me. Stop listening to what they say, she told me one slow Tuesday, standing behind me while I checked in a man who was complaining about his room being too close to the elevator. Watch how their eyes move. Listen to the way they breathe. People will tell you what they want, but their bodies will tell you what they're afraid of. So I watched. The man's voice was loud, but his eyes kept darting to his phone. He wasn't angry about the room. He was terrified of missing a call. I offered to route all calls directly to his cell and comped his Wi-Fi. He stopped complaining. Later, Evelyn nodded. See, that was never about the elevator. I started replaying my past with that lens. How my father's jaw clenched before he raised his voice. How my mother's fingers twitched whenever anyone mentioned the pastor. How Talon's laugh had been a fraction too forced the last time we talked on the phone. All the signs had been there. I just hadn't known how to read them. Between shifts, Evelyn sat me in a small office off the lobby and introduced me to another world. Spreadsheets, occupancy rates, cost per head, payroll. Affection is a beautiful thing, she told me as we went through vendor contracts line by line, but it's the least reliable currency. Assets and information, those are real. Learn them and no one gets to yank the floor out from under you again. A few months in, she called me into her private office upstairs. A man was waiting there, early 30s, dark suit, eyes that missed nothing. Nova, this is Rhett Maddox, she said. He keeps my enemies honest. Rhett smiled and shook my hand. More accurately, I remind them what they signed, he said. He sat across from me and asked, Do you have any paperwork from the night your parents kicked you out? I'd carried that folder with me even when I had nothing else. I slid the crumpled pages across the desk. He scanned them, his expression flattening. They didn't just throw you out, he said. They made you sign away any claim you might have had to their support, and to any obligation toward your child. They wanted you gone legally, not just physically. My stomach dropped. So that's it, I said. They're off the hook. Not exactly, he replied. This is a terrible look in front of a judge, especially if they ever pretend they didn't do it. And it also creates a clean line between their life and yours. If you're smart, this can become a very sharp piece of leverage. For the first time, I entertained the idea that the document that severed me might someday protect me. The other person who changed everything showed up when the hotel's computer system crashed one weekend. We all panicked. Evelyn called in someone from IT with the same tone she used for lawyers and surgeons. A woman about 10 years older than me arrived, black jeans, messy bun, laptop covered in stickers. She slid into the chair behind the front desk, fingers flying over keys. Who are you? I asked. Sable Quinn, she said. I keep idiots out of your network. She had the system back online in under an hour. While she waited for a backup to finish, she watched me handle guests, then tilted her head. You pay attention, she said. Most people your age don't. You ever think about how much of yourself you leave lying around online? I shrugged. I deleted my social media when I left home. Cute, she said. That just means you've stopped feeding the beast. Doesn't mean it stopped eating. Over coffees in the staff break room, she showed me how easy it was to pull old records, cached posts, metadata from photos. She taught me to lock down my information, to use aliases to track login locations. Data is a weapon, she said. You either control it, or someone uses it on you. Between Eveline, Rhett, and Sable, my world expanded and sharpened at the same time. I was building a toolkit I hadn't even known existed. I was also working too much, sleeping too little, and pretending that being busy meant I was fine. The night everything broke started like any other. I was on a late shift, the lobby quiet, the hum of the elevator the only sound. I was restocking the mini fridge in a back storage room when a bolt of pain tore across my abdomen. It stole my breath so completely I dropped to my knees. For a second I thought it would pass, that I'd eaten something bad, that I could just breathe through it. Then the floor tilted, the edges of my vision went dark, and I felt myself falling. When I woke up, everything was white and humming. A hospital ceiling, the steady beep of a monitor, the taste of salt on my lips. Eveline sat in a chair by the bed, hands clasped in her lap, her face more lined than I'd ever seen it. The doctor explained in careful, gentle words that my body had given out. Stress, overwork, not enough food, too much weight carried alone. "I'm sorry," he said. "You lost the pregnancy." I didn't cry at first. It was like someone had emptied me out, scooped everything out of my chest, and left a hollow shell behind. I stared at the wall while his words bounced around the room and fell flat. The baby I'd whispered to on that dark street, the one I'd promised we'd figure it out together, was gone. Later, when he left us alone, Eveline moved her chair closer and rested a hand on my shoulder. "You did not lose everything," she said quietly. "You lost a piece of the life they tried to trap you in. Your future is still yours to build." The tears came then, hard and shaking, the kind that come from somewhere deeper than grief alone. We held a small memorial in her backyard a week later. Just the two of us, a candle, a handful of wildflowers in a glass jar. No body, no headstone, just a name. I never said out loud, and a silence that somehow honored it. After that, something in me shifted. The soft part that had been waiting somewhere in the back of my mind for my parents to show up and say they were wrong finally died with that child. I decided I would never again place my survival in anyone's hands but my own. Rhett started talking about the future as if I had one. "When you have assets," he said, "we'll put them in a trust with very clear terms. No one touches what's yours unless you want them to." Sable walked me through setting up separate identities online, shielding my real details behind layers of protection. Eveline watched it all with a kind of fierce pride. One evening, after a long day of training and check-ins, we sat in her office with the city lights of Utah stretched out beyond the window. She poured herself a drink, then looked at me over the rim of the glass. "You will get your chance one day," she said. "They will come back when they think you have something they want. When that happens, you are not going to scream or beg or ask them why. You are going to be so far above them they have to look up to see your shadow." I stood on the hotel rooftop that night, wind tugging at my hair, the town spread below in a grid of yellow and red. I thought about a 16-year-old girl on a freezing curb and the woman I wanted to become. I promised myself silently that I would build a life they couldn't reach, no matter how high they climbed or how loud they knocked. Time didn't heal everything, but it did give me room to grow sharper edges. By the time I turned 18, I wasn't just the girl at the front desk anymore. Eveline moved me into a junior management role, then into her shadow in meetings most people my age would never even be allowed to attend. I watched her negotiate with vendors, soothe angry investors, and dismiss men twice her size with a single raised eyebrow. She'd nudge me to speak up. "What do you see that they're not saying?" she'd ask after a tense discussion about expansion. I'd point out the undercurrent of fear in a banker's voice, the way a partner avoided eye contact whenever long-term risk came up. I learned to hear the thing behind the thing, to sort out what people wanted from what they truly needed. A year after the miscarriage, the ache was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was an emptiness I wanted to fill on my own terms. One afternoon, as we walked past a playground on the way back from a site visit, I found myself standing at the fence watching a toddler chase bubbles. "You still want to be a mother?" Eveline said quietly beside me. It wasn't a question. Not like before, I said. Not by accident. Not as a problem to be fixed. A few months later, she drove me to a small adoption agency in Seattle. The waiting room smelled like coffee and crayons. A social worker led us down a hallway to a nursery where two infants slept in side-by-side bassinets. One of them had a fist curled tight near his face, and a shock of dark hair sticking straight up. When I stepped closer, his eyes opened, clear, curious, oddly calm. He just looked at me. Not past me, not through me. At me. This one, I heard myself say. His name is Orion. The paperwork took weeks. Background checks, interviews, home assessments. When we sat down to sign the final documents, a clerk flipped through my file and paused on a scanned copy of the waiver my father had made me sign. His eyebrows rose. "You know," he said, tapping the page. "This actually works in your favor. It makes it very hard for your family of origin to claim any right to this child now or later." I stared at the line where 16-year-old me had scrawled her name. The same ink that had cut me off from any help from them was now part of a barrier between my son and their reach. I walked out of that office with a sleeping baby in my arms and a strange, fierce gratitude for a document I'd once thought was nothing but a curse. Life narrowed and expanded at the same time. My days revolved around feedings and board meetings, late-night cries, and early-morning conference calls. Orion grew up crawling between the legs of hotel furniture, napping in a playpen behind my desk, being passed from housekeeper to concierge to front desk manager, like he belonged to all of us. Rhett stopped being just Eveline's lawyer and became mine too. He drew up guardianship papers, created the first version of the trust he'd once joked about. Every clause had a purpose. No biological relative could touch anything designated for Orion without my explicit written consent. "We're building a wall," he said, brick by brick. Sable set up layers of protection for us. Different addresses for different accounts, secure storage for sensitive files, alerts that pinged her whenever someone searched my full name in certain databases. "You're going to be visible," she told me as Orion got older, and I took on more public roles. "Let's make sure they only see what you want them to." By the time Orion was 8, it was obvious he wasn't just bright. He saw systems the way other kids saw Lego sets. Sable showed him how to code simple games as a way to keep him busy one rainy weekend. Within days, he was asking questions that made her sit up straighter. "He's annoying," she told me later, affection in her voice. In a good way. One evening when he was 10, the hotel's reservation software froze in the middle of a busy night. It couldn't figure it out. Phones were ringing off the hook. Orion sat on the floor of the office with a laptop open, brow furrowed. "Your system keeps double booking this one block of rooms," he said, "because it's trying to optimize 2 variables at once and freaking out. You should let it choose." 20 minutes later, he had written a small script that rerouted the algorithm, balancing occupancy and price in a way that smoothed the chaos instead of amplifying it. Within a month, the change had quietly bumped revenue across all shoreline properties. A quarter later, a regional business journal ran a piece, "10-year-old prodigy fixes what the pros couldn't." They used a photo of him standing in the lobby, arms crossed, grinning at the camera with my eyes. I read the article alone in my kitchen in Portland, where Eveline had helped me buy a house overlooking the trees. Beneath the pride, something colder moved. The Hale name was nowhere in that story, but mine was. And the internet is a small town when you've left a trail of people obsessed with reputation. I didn't have to wait long for proof. One night, Sable showed up at my door with her laptop and a grim smile. She spun it around to face me. "Got a little ping," she said. "Thought you'd want to see." On the screen was a list of recent search queries tied to an IP address in Arizona. How to contact estranged child grandparent, visitation rights, Oregon, Orion Hale, software, legal rights to genius grandchild. My chest went tight. "Arizona," I said. "They really moved to the desert." "Looks like it," she replied. "And looks like they found their way back to your name the second it appeared next to something they consider valuable." Not long after that, Eveline's body finally started to show the strain of the life she'd wrestled into shape. She got quieter, thinner, her sharpness never dulled but turned inward. In the end, she refused a hospital bed and stayed in her room, the one with the big window that looked out over the city that had become both my prison and my launching pad. After she was gone, Rhett handed me a flash drive and an envelope. The drive contained a video. The envelope held her will. In the video, she sat in her office looking straight into the camera like she was looking at me. "If you're watching this," she said, "I'm either dead or bored out of my mind. Either way, listen to me. They will come back when they think they can get something from you. Remember this, you have every card. They only have hunger. Do not confuse noise with power. Her will made me the primary heir to her holdings with a list of legal protections so airtight even Rhett was impressed. There were explicit provisions blocking any claim from my family of origin spelled out in a way that felt almost personal. That night, after the calls and the paperwork and the condolences, I stood in Orion's doorway and watched him sleep, his laptop still open on his desk, with graphs of projected bookings glowing softly. His hands were thrown up by his head the way they had been in that Seattle nursery the first day I saw him. I sat on the edge of his bed, brushed his hair back, and whispered, "They're coming. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but they're already on their way." For the first time since I watched my parents' door slam shut, the thought didn't make me shake. It made me feel steady. Because now, if they knocked, it wouldn't be on a scared teenager's door. It would be on mine. And I was ready. The morning of the Pacific Future Tech Summit Seattle felt like it was vibrating. The convention center was a maze of cables and steel trusses, people with badges hustling in every direction, last-minute slide decks being edited in corners. Screens the size of houses cycled through sponsor logos and highlight reels. In the middle of all that noise, I walked in with Orion on one side, Rhett and Sable on the other, and felt oddly calm. My heart was pounding, sure, but not with fear. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff you chose to climb. Backstage, technicians clipped mics to Orion's jacket and tested audio levels. He joked with them, easy and unbothered, only glancing at me once to check that I was watching. "You ready?" I asked. He grinned. "You kidding? I was born ready for this." Rhett leaned close while scanning the room. "Today is where it ends," he murmured. I shook my head. "Today is where it finally makes sense." When we stepped out to look at the audience filtering in, I saw them almost immediately. Front row center, dressed like they thought they were attending an awards gala. Marjorie wore a pale blouse and a soft cardigan, hands folded, mouth arranged into something meant to look gentle. Silas sat tall beside her, chin lifted, jaw set like this was just another church recognition ceremony. On his other side was Talon in an expensive suit that didn't quite fit right. His smile a little too bright. They saw me. It flickered across their faces, the surprise, then the calculation. I could practically hear the story they were telling themselves. Long-lost daughter, brilliant grandson, public reconciliation, a second chance to play the perfect family in front of cameras. They had no idea they were sitting in the splash zone. The house lights dimmed, and the host walked out, talked about innovation and disruption and the future of hospitality. Then he introduced the young founder who's already changing the game, and Orion strode onto the stage. He didn't look at them. He looked at the 1,000 people in front of him, hands steady on the podium, and walked through his software like he was explaining a math problem to a friend. He talked about dynamic pricing, energy efficiency, guest behavior patterns. He spoke clearly, confidently, his slides crisp and elegant. When the demo played a dashboard showing how a hotel could cut waste and boost profit in real time, the crowd broke into applause. Cameras flashed. You could feel the room leaning forward. In the wings, I watched my parents watch him. Marjorie's eyes shone, but not with pride, with hunger. Silas nodded along like he'd always known his grandson would be exceptional. Talon sat back with his ankle on his knee, trying to look casual, but his fingers were drumming fast against his leg. As the applause died down, the big screen behind Orion went black for a beat. Then a new image faded in a woman in her 70s, white hair pulled back, sitting in a room lined with books. Eveline. Her voice filled the hall. Family, she said, is not the people who show up when you shine. Family is the people who stand beside you when you're broken. The room quieted. People glanced at each other, then back at the screen. There are cowards, she continued, who will throw their own child into the cold to keep their reputation clean. They may sleep fine for a while, but life has a way of putting a spotlight exactly where it hurts. From my vantage point, I saw my mother's shoulders stiffen. My father's hand tightened around the program in his lap until the paper crumpled. When the video faded, Rhett walked out. He didn't bother with small talk. "Good morning," he said. "My name is Rhett Maddox. I'm legal counsel for the Shoreline Group and for Nova Hale." At the sound of my name, a ripple moved through the crowd. Some people recognized it from Orion's story, some from the recent lawsuit filings that local media had started sniffing around. A document appeared on the screen behind him, blown up so large you could see every crease in the scan. It was the waiver I'd signed at 16, the one they'd shoved at me across the dining table. The projector highlighted a section in yellow. He read it slowly. "We, the undersigned Silas Hale and Marjorie Hale, voluntarily relinquish all rights and responsibilities toward our daughter Nova Hale, and any offspring born or unborn." Gasps scattered through the room like dropped glass. Marjorie lurched to her feet. "That's not," she started, voice shaking. "That's out of context." Rhett didn't look at her. "This document was signed in their home on a school night," he said. Nova was 16. They were adults fully aware of what they were doing. For 22 years they lived according to this piece of paper, until Orion's work became valuable. Sable stepped out next, laptop in hand, eyes cool. "And here," she said, "is what they did when they realized the child they once deemed expendable had raised someone they wanted access to." The screen shifted to a series of emails and message screenshots. Silas writing to Talon about leveraging the boy's success. Marjorie asking if a sympathy campaign online might help pressure her into cooperating, Talon suggesting they play on her guilt from the past. Search logs from an Arizona IP address showed queries about how to sue for grandparent rights in Oregon, how to gain control of a trust, how to capitalize on a minor's intellectual property. Every time a new message flashed up, you could feel the energy in the room change: disbelief, then disgust. People turned in their seats to look at the three of them in the front row. That's when I walked out. The stage lights were bright, but I could see them clearly. My mother's makeup had started to crack around her eyes. My father looked like someone had pulled the foundation out from under his feet. Talon's cocky posture had collapsed. He was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, as if maybe if he moved fast enough he could outrun his own words on the screen. I stepped up to the microphone and took a breath that felt like it gathered every year between then and now. "Since we seem to be putting things on record today," I said, "let me correct one misconception." I looked straight at my parents. "The child you think you have a right to meet died 22 years ago. That baby didn't survive the months after you shoved me out into the winter at 16. My body gave out from stress and hunger and fear." Marjorie's knees buckled. She sank back into her seat, hand over her mouth. Silas just stared. "I buried that part of my life with her," I went on, my voice steady. "Orion is my son. Not your legacy, not your redemption arc. He is adopted. He is here because I chose him. He is protected by laws you signed and never thought you'd see again." I turned slightly so the crowd could hear me clearly. "He does not share your blood. He will never share your name, and you will never have a claim on him." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of judgment, of understanding, of people putting together the story for themselves. Rhett stepped up beside me, a stack of folders in his hand. "For the record," he said, "a judge reviewed the pattern of harassment, attempted manipulation, and the original waiver. As of this morning, the court has granted a protective order." Effective immediately, Silas and Marjorie Hale and Talon Crest are barred from contacting Nova or Orion directly or indirectly. Copies are being served now. Security officers in suits appeared at the ends of the row. One by one, they handed over papers. My father tried to argue his voice, rising, invoking rights and misunderstandings. My mother sobbed something about forgiveness. Talon swore under his breath, looking wildly between exits. None of it mattered. Cameras caught every second as the officers ushered them up the aisle and out of the hall under the unblinking stare of 1,000 strangers. Watching them go, I remembered the slam of that front door and the click of the lock behind me. I remembered the feeling of the cold on my face and the terror of having nowhere to land. Now, as the conference doors closed behind them, I felt none of that. Just a settled, quiet certainty. 22 years ago, they closed me out of their world. Today, the world closed them out of mine. When I stepped off the stage, Orion left the cluster of reporters and walked straight to me, wrapping me in a hug so tight it knocked the wind out of me in the best way. "You okay?" he murmured into my shoulder. I smiled against his hair. "This isn't about being okay," I said. "This is about things finally being what they always should have been." The fallout moved faster than I expected. Clips from the summit hit every feed before we'd even left the building. Headlines appeared on local sites, then national ones. Parents who disowned teen daughter, exposed after suing for access to her tech prodigy son. Old photos surfaced from church programs and community events, screenshots of my parents on stages talking about morality and family values, now set beside the document where they'd signed me away. Within a week, Silas was suspended from the small finance firm he'd landed at after leaving Wyoming. Clients pulled out, citing reputational concerns. The church in Arizona quietly removed him and Marjorie from leadership roles. In a smaller note buried in a business column, there was mention of an IRS inquiry into Talon's side ventures, thanks to some offshore accounts Sable had flagged for the right people. I watched all of it from my kitchen in Portland, while I packed Orion's lunch and reminded him not to forget his laptop charger. There was a strange disconnect in loading a dishwasher while talking to a reporter on Bluetooth about systemic family abuse and legal loopholes. But that was the point. My life was no longer organized around their choices. One late night, a few weeks after the summit, I stood in the doorway of Orion's room. He was at his desk, headphones on, hair sticking up in every direction as lines of code scrolled past his screen. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to scare me and now felt like a gift. Everything I had done, the long nights, the training, the constant vigilance, the choice to take in a baby when I was barely steady myself, had led to this simple domestic moment. A boy in a hoodie, tapping keys safe and unafraid under my roof. Eveline's inheritance cleared probate soon after. Her properties, her shares, the nest egg she'd built out of spite and brilliance, all landed in accounts Rhett had set up years ago. Sitting in his office, looking at the numbers, I felt the weight of what she'd handed me. It wasn't just money. It was a mandate. "We could just invest and walk away," Rhett said. "Disappear into some island if you wanted." I shook my head. "She didn't pull me off the side of the road so I could hide," I said. "She did it so I could pull someone else up when no one's watching. So we built the Shore Foundation. Its mission was simple housing, education, and legal support for young women kicked out of their homes for getting pregnant." At the launch event, I stood on another stage, this time in a smaller hall, facing a crowd that included social workers, donors, and women who looked like younger versions of me. No one deserves to be discarded because they were human at the wrong time, I told them. You are not a scandal. You are not a stain. You are not a mistake someone has to hide. You are a person, and you deserve a life. The applause that day felt different. It wasn't about genius or profit. It was about survival and dignity. Not long after, a letter arrived at my house in Portland. No return address, but I knew the handwriting on the envelope before I even opened it. Neat, precise loops. My mother's. Inside were 3 pages, the words crowded ink smudged where her hand had shaken. She wrote about being scared about growing up in a world where image was everything, about making terrible choices she couldn't undo. She asked for one meeting. Just to explain. Just once. Just you and me. I read it twice. Then I folded it back along its creases and walked into my office. I opened a small fireproof box where I kept things that had once defined me: my first pay stub from the hotel, a copy of my adoption papers, a photo of Eveline and me on a balcony in Utah. I laid the letter inside, closed the lid, and turned the key. I didn't do it because I forgave her. I did it because I no longer needed anything she could possibly offer, including an apology. Emails from Talon started around the same time. Long paragraphs about how he'd been young and pressured, how his parents had forced his hand, how he had changed. He mentioned potential collaborations, how it might mean a lot to Orion to know his biological father. I sent one reply. The only father Orion has ever needed, I wrote, is the one who showed up every single day. You were done being part of this story before he even existed. Then I blocked his address. Life moved as it does forward. On a clear evening a year after the summit, Red and I stood on the rooftop deck of my house, the forest below us turning dark as Portland lit up in patches through the trees. We'd been moving toward each other for years, orbiting the same center, always putting fires out first. That night there were no emergencies. Just the sound of wind and distant traffic. I don't need rescuing, I told him, feeling the truth of it down to my bones. He smiled. I know, he said. That's why I want to be here. Not to save you. Just to be next to you while you keep burning their world down in all the right ways. I was the one who asked. Not on one knee, not with a rehearsed speech. Just a simple, so, you want to do this whole life thing officially? He laughed, that real, unguarded laugh I'd come to love. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I really do. Months later, I watched Orion stand on yet another stage, this time as the newly named CTO of a travel tech startup that had just closed a major funding round. He spoke about ethics in AI, about building tools that didn't exploit people, about the responsibility that came with power. I sat in the front row and thought, this is what breaking the chain looks like. One night after all of it, the summit, the foundation, the engagement, the new title on Orion's business card, I stood alone on my balcony as the city lights flickered on below. The air was cool, my hand wrapped around a mug of tea, the hum of the house behind me steady and familiar. 22 years earlier, I'd stood on a different doorstep in the cold, begging not to be left outside. 22 years later, I was the one standing inside, choosing which doors stayed open and which ones would never be unlocked again. People like to talk about revenge like it's some dramatic fire. For me, it wasn't fire. It was refusal. Refusal to let what they did be the last word. Refusal to let their definition of family be the only one I knew. The girl they pushed out into the winter died a long time ago on a hospital bed with no one but a stubborn old woman at her side. The woman on this balcony looking out over a life she built from the rubble is someone else entirely. Someone they can't touch no matter how hard they pound on the door.